So you can all gather towards our seats, please. So just a reminder, please put your phones on silent or vibrate. Okay. So next up we have Lucy Moore. She's an environmental mediator and she's here to talk about building trust in unlikely places. So, great, turn over to you, Lucy.
Great. Thank you, Debbie, so much. Let me find my right location here. Is this a good distance from the mic for you folks? Everybody okay? Great. So I suddenly realized that I'm kind of intermission act in between technical stuff. And because what I'm going to talk about is really got to do with people, relationships, and collaboration. So kind of get ready for that. I'm really happy to be here. Debbie asked, I met her at a conference recently in Tucson, and when she said what she was doing, it was like, whoa, I used to do that. I actually was the facilitator for the very beginning of the collaborative program way back, I don't know, a million years ago. And so it's really wonderful to be here with all of you, see that it still lives and breathes and is doing good work. And I was really happy to catch up with Debbie. So I have got 20 minutes. I'm going to set a timer for myself here. And it's going. Oh, you got good, okay. So what I wanted to do was share with you an example of collaboration that I think is working. And this is a very quick case study, and I hope to have questions, time for questions afterwards if you've got any. This is a case that is ongoing at the time, so I need to be careful as mediator of this case to not give away anything I should. So, but I am confident that it's okay to talk about the process. So what I am not technically savvy here.
Use it to space bar too.
I think I'm good. So building trust in unlikely places, and what I mean is with unlikely groups that you wouldn't think would build trust with each other very easily. This case is a Los Alamos Natural Labs Natural Resource Damage Assessment Trustee Council. Huge mouthful. Anybody familiar with Natural Resource Damage Assessment with that act? Yeah, all right. So we call it NERDA, naturally. So these are we're all NERDA nerds. NERDA, then in this case, natural resources refers to land, water, wildlife, air, cultural sites, any other parts of the natural environment that are owned or managed by a government, federal or state or county, and that includes tribes. It's part of the Superfund Act, and it usually kicks in following cleanup to kind of take care of what cleanup didn't take care of. The requirement is that the natural resources that have been damaged by contamination, oil spill, and other contamination, such as has happened at Los Alamos, that contamination be cleaned up, that the natural resource be restored to its pre-contamination condition. If that's not possible, and at Los Alamos, obviously, in some cases, groundwater, surface water, soil, it is not possible to restore it to pre-contamination conditions. So then the goal is to find a replacement. Well, when we're talking about damage to, especially to Pueblo areas that are special for various reasons, you can't just find a replacement. You can't say, well, that mesa over there, that looks like a really good place for your origin story to take place instead of this place, which is now contaminated. How about we trade you? Well, that's obviously not going to work. So we're in this process going to be facing situations like that. So the last alternative is compensation for the natural resources, and that usually happens in terms of money, although it can be other ways of doing it. So here's where you see my real technical skills. Okay, so here we have up on the hill Los Alamos, obviously the labs. We've got pueblos down below. We've got water, surface, and groundwater flowing down the hill, and other kinds of contamination. up there in the upper right, we've got something sacred that we don't need to know exactly where it is or what is sacred about it, but it is very special cultural properties of Santa Clara Pueblo, also true of San Ildefonso. So this is the contamination setup. So the work of the natural resource damage assessment, implementation and restoration compensation, everything is done by a trustee council, and this is mandated in law. And in this case, the trustee council consists of federal land managers, Department of Energy, LANL, and the Forest Service all have got land in this area, state land management reps, and that includes the New Mexico Natural Resource Trustee, kind of acting on behalf of the Environment Department and the people of New Mexico. And then we've got 4 tribes at the table: Santa Clara, Sanai, Jemez, and Cochiti. So looking at that list, it's like, ooh, I would not want to be in the room with them all together. I mean, these are, in a sense, natural enemies. State and federal have all kinds of clashes about jurisdiction and authority and this and that. Tribes have big problems with the state, maybe even bigger problems with DOE and LANL that have actually contaminated their land. How could this be titled Finding Trust in Unlikely Places, or whatever I called this? How can that be? Okay, that's kind of my point. So let me talk about the process that we're in. The assessment phase began about 6 years ago, and an assessment plan was issued a couple of years ago, and that determined what needed to be studied in terms of the natural environment to find out what the injury, what the extent of the injury to the resources were. We're now in the second phase, kind of hung up right in between there. We're looking at the assessment plan, gathering the data in order to determine the injury, and we're also looking ahead to different ways of resolving this. How are we going to come to agreement about what can be restored, what can be compensated? Could land be purchased if a pueblo has suffered injury that can't be restored and can't be replaced? Is there perhaps land somewhere that could be purchased for them in compensation for this loss? We have a contractor, I think this is really important, an outside contractor from Cambridge, Massachusetts Industrial Economics, and they are very experienced in valuing natural resource damage and doing this kind of case. And so they are doing all of the technical work for the trustee council. So we don't, and the trustee council has agreed that they were on them as contractors, and often has a lot of challenging questions for them. Why didn't you look at this particular source of contamination or that? But they're not bad. It isn't like one person has an expert against another person's expert. They're all agreed. This is our expert team. They're working for us. I can question them as much as I want, but it will be in the group all together, and we will deal with it together. I think that's important. We meet monthly. It's a lot, and you can imagine 6 years of meeting monthly. I don't know, how often do you guys meet?
Varies.
Varies, yeah. But anyway, you know what that's like to see each other over and over. Can be good, can be not so great. So challenges, let me just check my time here. Okay, I'm good. So the challenges are obviously the complexity of the data and the fact that those at the table are mostly technical experts of some kind, but there's a big degree of expertise at the table. So the tribes are represented by Natural Resource Department chiefs, that kind of thing. The Natural Resource Trustee is an appointee by the governor, may have certain kinds of background that's applicable or not. We may have a DOE or LANL person there that's very, very knowledgeable. So to kind of keep that, keep the data understandable to everybody is a part of my role as a facilitator to be sure that we're not going so fast that we lose people, we're not going so slow that we bore people or make them nervous that we're never going to get to the end of this. That's a real challenge. The turnover of members, and I put non-tribal there because actually when I think about it, the tribal members have been very consistent because they're not elected officials. We don't have the governor there. So that would be a big turnover every year or so in many cases. But because these are the professionals in the departments of the pueblos, they stay put. But there has been a lot of turnover in the DOE and Los Alamos spots. And that, I think, is because of bureaucratic dynamics, I decided to call it. but that's just the problems of running a gigantic thing like the labs. The contract, the master contract turns over, I think, every 5 years. There are other kinds of contracts that rotate every 3 years. So we're constantly being stuck with, oh, you know, we can't meet now because the money dried up. It'll be there next month, but not, you know, and now here's a new representative at the table from DOE because the contractor changed. So we've had some kind of slow ups and having to go back and integrate new people into the process because it takes some significant orientation. Sensitivity to Pueblo data has been a big challenge and one that I think we've handled pretty well. And the issue obviously is that in order to determine injury, it's one, you know, you can measure, you can look at a plant that died because of the contamination. You can look at ant wildlife that are injured in certain ways. But how about a Pueblo culture? How do you determine injury, let alone quantify and put a dollar amount on the injury to that culture? That is really delicate business and very uncomfortable for Pueblos to talk about in those terms. So we don't talk about it in those terms. At this point, we're gathering data, or rather the Pueblos are gathering their own data, and this is important, about the cultural losses that they have experienced as a result of the contamination from Los Alamos. So for instance, a generation has not been able to visit in person a sacred site in a certain location. It's behind a barbed wire that has skull and crossbones on it, like you cannot enter here no matter what. So that generation of young people has not been able to go to have important experiences at that site with the older generation. The older generation is dying off. And so how do you determine that break in the cultural life of the Pueblo? That's been very difficult. Intertribal conflicts, that belongs in the future, really. We have not had any to speak of, but in the future, when we get down to what kind of projects are we going to do, there will be competition among the Pueblos. We need most of the money because we had most of the damage. We want this. I anticipate that. This is also going to have to go through Justice Department approval and funding. So what has worked about this? And I'm now down to 2 minutes, but anyway, the relationships, and that has taken years. The fact that we've been at this 6 years is in our favor. People really know each other, like each other. You just can't spend that much time together, go through crises of various kinds and not have a relationship. Everyone at the table understands that everybody there is there in a professional role. So the person who's sitting there for DOE or LANL is not seen by the Pueblo as the bad guy. You ruined our land. You took this away from us. You know, if you never came, we would be just fine. That's the feeling about Los Alamos and about what happened, but it's not pinned on those individuals. And the Pueblos on their side are, everybody is there in a professional way, which I think is really important. The history that has happened is acknowledged and accepted, and I think that's a big important thing too, not to deny it, not to pretend it never happened, but to understand and put it on the table, talk about it when you need to talk about it, but understand that we're moving on. So as I said before, the experts, data gatherers are contractors, and they're actually hired by DOE, but with some input from the trustee council. And so that's really been important in making this work, that people have got a common outside source of expertise. The meetings are facilitated by me. It's my job to make it a safe space for everybody. We do a process check annually. I send out a survey, I interview everybody. How's it going in terms of process? You feel you're treated okay? Is this a safe space? Are we moving too slow? Are we moving too fast? Is it too complicated? And I make a little report about how we're doing in terms of process. We rotate the meeting locations. So we meet at a Pueblo, then we meet up at the labs, then we meet in Santa Fe, then in Albuquerque, and then we just keep rotating. That keeps a kind of respectful balance about how important everybody is. It isn't that everybody has to go to a single important location for this meeting. And finally, she says stop. It says stop. Finally, they eat lunch together once a month and do other things like field trips. And I think the away from the table, away from the work table time has been really important too. So thank you so much, and good luck to you all.